There are multiple things that you don't do well as a leader when you sleep poorly. And a number of them are, for example, you don't take in other people's ideas very well. Because what happens is when you're really tired, you don't pick up the nonverbals. And those of us that have been around a while know how important nonverbals are. So you don't pick them at all. Okay? So your ability to engage with staff, take on board their ideas, listen. I mean, what is a leader? One of their core skills is their ability to listen to others around them who are actually should be expert in their field, and you synthesize and bring that collaboration together and help make a collective decision and then set the direction accordingly and the strategic execution, etc. That just goes out the window when you can't sleep properly because you just can't cope with that ambiguity. All you're trying to do is hang on and get through the day.
Welcome to the How to Not Execute Your Strategy podcast. I'm your host, Tim Ojai. This podcast is dedicated to the biggest lessons learned from the people who own strategic execution, the senior leaders who live in the center of it. My guest today is Giles Watkins, the former chair of Vistage UK and now senior executive mentor. He's also the author of Positive Sleep, a book designed for business leaders to maximize one of the most essential elements of their lives. See the show notes for more information about Giles and to also get access to the leader guide for this episode. Let's get to it. Giles, it is so good to see you and to talk with you. Today, we are going to dig into some international experience because of your background in working throughout Europe, Africa, Middle East, Asia, and even our own experience, North and South America a little bit. Giles, welcome to the podcast.
Good to chat again, Tim. It's been a while.
It's been decades, actually, since I think that we've actually talked face to face. So let's dive in. You have been in a role where you've often been like the country chair or advising at a national leadership on what countries are doing for some fairly large companies. And then you've also been in the role of consulting and helping people who do that. And you're bringing that into your work as a consultant with executives around their strategic execution, as well as what's going on in their head and their heart that's helping them be most effective. So you're like the perfect person that I want to have on this podcast. And when I realized you were available, I was like, Giles, you got to be on this thing, man, because you actually totally get what we're talking about.
Yeah, I obviously, as you said, I've worked, I left university in the mid-'80s, so I've had a fairly long career now. Even before that, I was selling shoes on a Saturday and working in all sorts of things. I've worked part-time ever since I was 16, so I've always been, I'm mostly in customer-facing roles from the very first job I ever had in a shoe shop, which is one of the best jobs I ever had, actually.
Really?
And I'm qualified. I can fit a shoe properly. So if it all goes bad, Tim, I have a trade to fall back on. But yeah, a lot of my career, sort of for 30-odd years, was fairly international. And with Shell, with McKinsey, with Coates, which is a major thread and zip supplier internationally, etc. And I major a lot on sleep because I had a sleep issue, very bad sleep issue for about a decade. In fact, when we were working together, Tim, I was beginning that journey of having less and less sleep, which I'll probably never talk to you about. But I was really starting to struggle at that time, especially in that global role where we initially met. And I eventually managed to both address that and ended up writing a book about it. So I do quite a lot of work around sleep with leaders, particularly. Wrote a book called Positive Sleep, came out about 4 years ago and is sold out. I'm just refining the second edition.
That's awesome. So first question everybody gets, same question. Tell us about a time when you had a strategy that did not go as planned, and what did you learn from it?
There were plenty to pick from, and I like to think I've learned from most of them. One that sprang to mind, Tim, particularly was my first overseas posting, as opposed to job where I traveled overseas, was with Shell. This is the late 1995. I was delighted to be selected as the new sales and marketing manager for the startup business in Shell in Vietnam. Shell had a massive market share before the war in the 60s and 70s, 70% market share. Pretty much every gas station was Shell. it was such an embedded company that you'd see a little shell drawn on the side of the road that meant petrol is available here. So it
Wow.
was that much in the psyche. And then left, of course. And when they came back, there was still a very fond feeling towards the company.
Mm.
We had less than 2%, and that was all being done offshore, basically through distributors. We just got the license. So the reason for the recruitment was we just had a license to run a business. I go back there, and you've got the marine business supplying the offshore stuff, and also the waterways in Vietnam. You've got the industrial business, which I knew very well. My background was industrial direct sales and so forth. And you've got the consumer business. And the consumer business was mostly through distributors. In fact, it was all through distributors, who all had sub-distributors. And they were importers, because we hadn't had a business locally. So the only way we could trade was that those distributors we appointed would give a geographical area like Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City, which was formerly Saigon, would get the geography and buy in themselves. So my job, as we got the license, was to transform that. And it went very well on the industrial and marine side. It was an unmitigated disaster on the consumer side. We probably went backwards over a 2-year period
Really?
because we started running consumer promotions, and we were running them through distributors that were used to running their own shows. So we weren't even sure the consumers were getting the promotions. We launched a new product. It seemed to make no difference at all. And we were just cannibalizing previous products, slightly higher margin, maybe, but with a huge extra effort. And then someone said, oh, what we need to do is go the TV ad route. Now, we got offered basically free adverts from Shell in Thailand. They cut and spliced them as best they could, but it looked like a Thailand advert that had been spliced up,
That's really common for international stuff. A lot of the time, if anybody listening is in an international situation where you're getting, quote, resources from other countries, and they're like, oh no, it looks enough like you. The thinking that goes into that decision the thing is, we laugh about it. You're the 1990s doing this. Here we are in the 2020s, and we're still seeing that same pattern of behavior. Oh, it's okay. It's French, so we can just use what we use in Canada and just give them the Canadian French version, or vice versa. Like the French people speaking that sound completely different to each other.
So probably that would be even worse, probably, to that. But no, you're right.
Yeah, why do large companies have this struggle? Because this is consistent.
I think maybe a controversial comment, but it's something I hold quite deeply. I don't think it's exclusive to companies. I think governments do it as well.
Fair.
I'm listening to a book at the moment, an audio book by a guy called Rory Stewart, who fairly senior politician here, who now is quite famous for doing podcasts, who worked it was both Iraq and Afghanistan in various different roles, diplomatic roles, charity roles, etc.
Yeah.
And he repeatedly talks about the thinking that they had and how it didn't work. Yeah. So I think it's a bit of a cultural issue, and certainly in Vietnam, it took me certainly the industrial side worked pretty well. But on the consumer side, it took me a good 2 years to work out what was going to work. And mostly that was just listening, allowing what people were telling me to finally sink in and percolate like coffee, sink in, and then blending that with stuff I knew from elsewhere and the capabilities I knew we had as a company. And suddenly it was like, okay, so TV adverts that are on midnight, and we don't, Jay Leno's not big in Vietnam. There's no culture of the late night chat show. People go to bed at 9:30 and get up at 5:00, right? So our ads were running 3 times a week when nobody was watching them. Unsurprisingly, any measurement we did showed that nobody knew they were on except us. So we spent $30,000, which was quite a lot of money at that time. And it was like, okay, so none of this is working. And there's a lot of pressure being put on me. You've been there 2 years now, Giles, and you're growing the business we know you could grow, and you're actually on target for that, but you're nowhere with this. One day, I was reading a Shell magazine, actually, a new international publication, a sales and marketing publication. And I was reading this article about merchandising and the channel. And I suddenly went, you idiot. You let other people who don't understand the situation dictate to you a bit, my general manager or some advice from the region or London or whatever, and letting them push the, no, you're the bloke in charge. Think about it. What we need is channel-based initiatives that are very local. One thing we had got right over the 2 years is we got rid of 7 of these 8 importer distributors that I described earlier, and we've now got 33 distributors all over the country covering much smaller areas, okay? Because what we found was that basically a distributor, particularly in that culture, wouldn't trust non-family members with money. They could only really deal in an area. I would say, you're doing a great job in this part of the Mekong Delta. Would you like to work in another area? And he'd say, no, I have no more children. Because literally, he wouldn't trust non-family members to do. And given the record of when they did trust non-family members, I would understand why. So people would run off the stock, right? Whatever. We worked out we needed get rid of sub-distributors. We needed always to be working direct with people, sell through the distributor, give them desktops from the company, start a proper inventory system, and actually work out how to sell through them. And then having that, so it was then, okay, how can we have channel initiatives? I was reading about merchandising and channels and rewarding people with good merchandising and promoting and selling products versus other incentives for the distributor rather than, if you like, more the consumer. So we started to focus on that, and we did a company-wide program. Everyone in the company, which is about 80 people by this time, went out and sold for a month. We had a competition. So we had the people from accounts, the people from collection, we had the logistics people. We had a tea lady. She went out, right? The tea lady.
That's awesome.
They all went out. I went out for the day, right? On the back of someone else's motorbike, and you're out, you're merchandising. How many can you sell today? How many? Right. Okay, little competition. None of the salespeople won. It was all women, and it was all women from accounts. I was trying to then persuade them if they like to join the sales force. None of them wanted to, but anyway. And we went 10-pin bowling afterwards, and we did all sorts of, we had a little celebration, a party. And suddenly we realized channel initiatives were the way. So then thought, let's relaunch that product. We launched to no interest, virtually 18 months before. And we decided to do these road shows around the country, a little bit like a tour. We should have had T-shirts made up, Tim.
You should have had them.
Da Nang on a Thursday.
You should have had the inflatable dancing man and everything, and then,
the
free whatever. Yeah. And a gun that shoots an air gun. Let me be clear, an air gun that shoots T-shirts into the crowd. That would be the
that kind of thing. So what happened was we perfected this kind of road show. We did it about 8 or 10 times all along the coast of Vietnam, where we went to different areas, and we'd do a hello, this is like 4:30, 5 o'clock in a nice venue, sometimes outside, sometimes in a hotel. We're launching this, give everyone a T-shirt, polo shirt, quite nice, high quality. And then we'd have a techie talk and a bit of merchandising, but light touch, really, kind of 45 minutes, and then it's party time.
Yeah.
Okay, then the food would come out, the band would come on, the karaoke went out, lucky draw for some goods to be like a fridge or whatever. And then I'd finish the show by doing my karaoke number, which was Top of the World by the Carpenters. And I'd stand on a table and sing. Okay. And it was just great fun, obviously, for me, but also it was, they'd never seen a Westerner stand on a table and sing to them.
That's awesome.
And we had a 40% growth target in this sector, and we'd done it by September. We'd flatlined and gone backwards probably for the previous 2 years. So it was just a huge win. And so you're talking about lessons learned, no doubt, from that. I mean, the first thing is listen to your gut, which I'd failed to do. Something was telling me this isn't working, but
really, so you felt
I was
that
so busy
internally.
working on other stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
I did a combination of not being enough of a disruptor. I mean, you know me, Tim. I'm probably not a disruptor by nature, even though there might, in this great dome of my head, I might be a bit of a disruptor. I certainly, in my younger days, and obviously I was early, mid-30s then, more difficult sometimes for me to say, no, I think that's complete cobblers, than I'd be more prepared to say it now.
What's changed? Let's stay there for a moment. What's changed? So Because there's a lot of folks who will second guess themselves and literally talk themselves out of making a decision that their gut says, do it. And in Hawaii, we have a word for that. It's called na'au. Your na'au is your gut. It's that instinct within
Right.
you. And we're constantly reminding our young ones, hey, listen to your na'au. Trust your na'au. But culturally, it doesn't sound like you were raised to do that in a corporate environment.
Oh, no, I think the last phrase, in a corporate environment, is the key one, actually.
Yeah.
Because I was certainly raised to say what I thought respectfully, but my parents listened to me. So it wasn't that I wasn't listened to as a child. I can't say that at all.
Yeah.
So I can't say that was the case. But certainly I remember the early days in Shell, it was a very hierarchical place, and people did tend to sit around a table and listen to the elder, as it were, and the senior guy, or mostly guy in those cases, man in those days, and what they said and so forth. And that was a factor. Over the years, I've realized that there's the value of my view. And I've also learnt from a phrase that a later CEO that I worked for, who I greatly admire, called Paul Foreman, who was the CEO of Coates PLC that I worked for quite a while. He said he was always looking for passionate views lightly held.
Hey, if you're enjoying this conversation, I want to encourage you to go to timohai.com/blog now and get the leader guide. It's an awesome way to allow me to both coach you personally through deeper reflection and to also open up the dialogue with your team. All right, back to the interview.
What he meant by that was someone who could pick up what they felt and really put it forward. However, if the team then said, it's 9-1 against you, Giles, we're going to go that way, you got behind the team view and you didn't keep banging on about how you thought it was wrong, and I think that emboldened me a bit as well to think, okay, this is what I think, I must put it forward. However, if it's not the way the business goes, I either have to accept that and stay on board or leave. So that was one thing. The second thing, I think that phrase, Tina, there is no alternative, is true in many situations, crisis situations perhaps, and so forth.
Okay, pause. You just said something I don't know. Tina, what is this? It's an acronym?
It's an acronym called There Is No Alternative.
And
Tina.
When do you use it?
If you'd got yourself into a particular point and you'd had to take action on something, it was a particular crisis situation. The reason I mention that is that I possibly thought initially there were no alternative to the strategies that were being given to me. And then, of course, on reflection, I realized there were quite a few options. Years later, I worked for McKinsey and developed my consulting skills. And I realized how if you get the right sort of people in a room and you allow them to see what happens in a very almost open, freewheeling, that may have, what you said was a bit daft, but it's made me think of why, and that's really helping way. And so I found that actually you can almost always, especially when you sleep well, the better I sleep, the more options I generate. Absolute correlation.
And yet, and let's take a few moments. If I'm not sleeping, I am not making good decisions. I'm certainly not running at peak. And the chances of bad decisions happening, or we'll call it less than best decisions being made, is constant. And then that snowballs, right? That just collectively builds.
Absolutely.
So then I wind up in a Tina situation, to use my new friend Tina. Hello, Tina. That I find I'm in a corner and I have no other alternative.
Yeah.
Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, absolutely. And most people have a trigger with a sleep problem. And mine was that there was a major reorganization brought about by Shell's purchase of Pennzoil, or acquisition, in 2002. And that meant that we would reorganize what we were doing in London. And like many multinationals, it's basically a form of musical chairs. So when the music stops, there are going to be less chairs. And will you have a chair? So, there's going to be some job cuts going through it. And that was a very Shell way of making a reorganization. And from that day on, what would happen with me was I'd just wake up a little bit earlier. It was 5 minutes a month or something, Tim. It would just be incremental until it was terrible issues. And I was waking up at 3 a.m. all the time and I was falling asleep over the soup sort of thing at night. Just awful stories. And what I learned was that There are multiple things that you don't do well as a leader when you sleep poorly. And a number of them are, for example, you don't take in other people's ideas very well. Because what happens is when you're really tired, you don't pick up the nonverbals. And those of us that have been around a while know how important nonverbals are. So you don't pick them at all. Okay? So your ability to engage with staff, take on board their ideas, listen. I mean, what is a leader? One of their core skills is their ability to listen to others around them who are actually should be expert in their field, and you synthesize and bring that collaboration together and help make a collective decision and then set the direction accordingly and the strategic execution, etc. That just goes out the window when you can't sleep properly because you just can't cope with that ambiguity. All you're trying to do is hang on and get through the day, really. So you get very blinkered. So playing to your world, particularly these days, and my world to some extent as well, Tim, around strategic execution, your ability to lead effectively the people that you're working with to execute properly will be massively diminished.
Is that because you're not making quick decisions? You're not making complete decisions?
Basically, in layman's terms, and I'm not a scientist, I'm a sleep communicator. I'm a business leader that cares about sleep, has done his research on the subject and communicates on the subject. The way I describe it to people is that most of the first half of the night, if you sleep 6, 7, 8 hours, somewhere in that space, the first half of the night is mostly about physical recovery, and the second half of the night is more around the mental side, the integration of so forth, the actual integration of the learnings from the previous day. So you come out with a version 33,833 of your brain the next day, a new operating system that integrates the learning from the previous day, and your ability then to generate options comes from that. So if you're not sleeping properly, and I went through a phase in 2010 where I was sleeping for about a month, I slept 3 hours a night, very high stress situation. I realized I wasn't solving any problems on a day-to-day basis, really. I was just lugging myself like a sack of potatoes from day to day. Because physically I could do it because I'd had just enough physical recovery time. You just caffeinate and then you sedate at night by having a couple of glasses of something to knock you out for 3 or 4 hours, and then off you get again. And it just horrific month.
And I will comment this as well. For those who don't know, alcohol is a horrible way to generate sleep because yes, your body will turn off, but your brain, to your point, will not enter the phases it's supposed to because you're an alcohol-induced rest and your brain is truly not recovering and synthesizing and doing those things that it's meant to do. So if anybody's listening and you're going, man, this sleep thing is really hitting me between the eyes, and this is personal experience, you're going to go to sleep, but you are not going to wake up the way that we're talking. You're fresh, you're ready. And to your point, you're creative, you're ready to engage, you're ready to listen, you're ready to make changes, all of those things that you're illuminating or at least pointing us in the direction of.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, alcohol's a sedative. It will knock you out, but it will not give you the depth of sleep you're looking for. And then when you wake up, you'll feel groggier, you're dehydrated, etc. And it just doesn't work. So increasingly, I say to people, if you can, and it sounds really early, but if you can have your last drink 4 hours before you go to sleep, that's probably ideal, actually, in terms of alcohol intake. And if it's going to be later than that, be aware of the effect it will have on your sleep and think about the next day. Can you grab a nap or how can you compensate? Just be aware of that because that's, especially as you get older, that's what happens. And the caffeinated piece is key because I try not to have any coffee now till about, I don't drink black tea or green tea really. So I don't have any caffeinated drinks till about an hour and a half after I wake up because I think that's giving my system a chance to wake up. I think there's as much benefit in focusing on how you wake up as there is on how you go to bed and the end of the day. There's not enough focus has been put on the beginning of the day. And then I endeavor to never have any caffeine after 12 noon because it interferes with the adenosine, which is called the sleep pressure in your system. So you've got your body clock and you've got the sleep pressure, two things that are working together to help you get to sleep.
Thank you. So let's go back to, you've learned, trust your gut. You've learned the power of sleep on making great decisions. And when you're not sleeping, you're not going to make the decisions you need to make, and you're not going to engage others the way you need to, et cetera, et cetera. Is there anything else that you would call out as a major learning from your execution journey?
Yeah, I think the other thing is, and it sounds a bit Eastern, but then of course I was working in Asia at the time. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. That's a learning there, because I read that. If I had read that journal a year before, I probably wouldn't have got the message. It came out at the right time, and I read it, and I went, I need to change this. And I kind of had to go and sell it internally. I had to go to my boss and say, look, we've got to stop that. Forget that. I know the advertised JWT is our global relationship, and they're saying we should do this. And no, we're not going to do it. We've got to stop that, Robin, right? And it so often has happened like that in my life, that when I was ready to execute a different strategy, inspiration would come.
So trusting the journey is a big one for folks. In my coaching practice, that's one of the things we'll dig into is, do you trust the journey? Because control's a myth. Control doesn't exist. We can tell ourselves to control the controllables, and I go, it's actually you're trying to influence what you can, but you can't truly control it. You can't control the weather. You can't control traffic. You can't control the market. You can't control your neighbor. You can't control your kids. And I'll argue how well you control yourself. Let's just start with how well you control your mouth and go from there. But when you talk about the opposite of trusting the journey itself and allowing the journey to unfold and adjust to the journey itself, we call it Eastern. I just say it's human. It's a part that we've suppressed culturally. And I'll go back into your original point around trust your gut. Well, your gut may say, just relax, just go with the river. And if it's going to take us over some rocks, we're going over some rocks. That's what it is. That's what this journey does. And then at the other end of it, we'll learn how to go over rocks. So let's rotate. We've got a few minutes left. What are 2 attributes you would tell any leader that if they're trying to build an organization that executes well, what are a couple attributes that everybody in that organization should have?
Yeah, it was a great question. I thought about this quite a lot. And you've known me off and on for a couple of decades now, Tim. So you won't be surprised I'll focus on a couple of very human aspects, because I tend to be that sort of leader. I would often say to people, don't show me the accounts for at least a month when I start a business. I just give me the parameters. I don't want to delve into I want to get to know the customers, the staff, the culture. Then I'll look at the numbers. Okay. I'm opposite way around. First thing is, you have to have the right people on the bus. And you have to know where the bus is going, and it has to be going, or you have to all agree it's going in this direction. Even if it turns out that you went down the wrong road, you're all on the bus together. Can you look for people, whether you are the person looking or you as an employee should be asking these same questions when you go for a role? Can you do the job? Will you do the job? Will you fit in? 3 basics there. If you don't have the right people around you, you're having a hope in hell of executing a strategy. And do you fit in? Now, fitting in isn't about homogeneity. It's about being able to work within the culture and hopefully bringing your uniqueness and your diversity to that culture, but not being repelled by the culture. It's so often the youngest or the newest person in the organization that comes up with the aha moment.
It's that fresh energy, a fresh set of eyes, fresh perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And which may well have been slightly suppressed by the culture and not allowed to do so. And you create a workshop and you spend a lot of time saying, you have permission to say the idiotic or the daft or whatever, because quite often that's exactly what we need.
The second thing you were going to say is the second attribute?
Is look after yourself. What, and in whatever way that means. Now, for me, that means great sleep, prioritizing sleep. There are 8 or 9 hours of a day where you have nothing scheduled to allow yourself to get to sleep and then to get up. Okay. For me, sleep's a priority, exercise a priority, and making time for others. I've got hopefully a 1-minute story for you on that one. 15 months into my time in Vietnam, I was suffering from a form of vertigo. There's a special name. I won't go into it. When I was very stressed, and it always happened on a tennis court. My only leisure activity, apart from going out a little bit, was playing tennis. Right? I'd be serving, and within 10 for me, literally, sometimes I'd end up on all fours. I'd be vomiting. It was terrible.
Yeah, horrible.
So I was invalided home, and I went for 2 brain scans, because the first one, there was a shadow on my brain, and they thought I had something. And the second one, I wouldn't say they put the finger over the lens, but there was something that had interfered with the scans. I had 3 days thinking that was it, it was all over. And it turned out it was a fault with the scan and I was fine. And I talked to the doctor, described my lifestyle, and he basically said, unless you change that lifestyle, you have to come home, because I was like working silly hours. And I go to a party, not drink, and go back to the office at midnight. Stuff like that. Ridiculous stuff.
Wow.
So I went back, I changed my lifestyle, I changed things around completely. I prioritized it. I worked really hard, but these are the parameters I worked within, which was still 50 hours, 50, 60 hours. But I did other stuff. I reorganized, I promoted people. I managed to stop a key guy from leaving. He, reversed his resignation, the whole thing. 24 months of consecutive sales growth. 24 months.
Because you took care of yourself.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Giles, thank you so much. Our time is up. This has been a very robust discussion, because we've not just talked about execution, but we've also talked about how you take care of yourself. And I'll summarize what I've heard in one sentence, is that if you don't take care of yourself, none of the other stuff will happen.
No.
Thank you again. Giles, always a pleasure.
Fabulous, Tim. Till the next time.
I hope you enjoyed that episode and have some solid takeaways. Here are 3 that I want to highlight. 1, be very careful letting other people make your decisions for you. While their inputs may be culturally correct, their decisions may be wrong. Have courage and listen to your gut. 2, do not underestimate the value that new people bring to your culture, even if they don't quite fit the culture yet. They have a fresh set of eyes that will see what everyone else might actually be missing. 3, if you are not sleeping enough, you are not operating effectively. You will miss critical information, including small things like nonverbal cues that will help you make the best decisions. If you enjoyed this episode, there are 3 things that I would ask of you. First, please share it with at least one person. Second, hit those rating stars on whatever platform you downloaded this podcast. When you do that, it raises the visibility of what we are talking about to people just like you. Third, follow me on LinkedIn and Meta, especially on Instagram at Tim_Ohai. You'll get even more content that will both challenge and inspire you. Holo mua. Onward and upward.